So if you can't hear me and you can't see me, don't worry about it. We're going to post a video of this up. You'll be able to watch the video of it. They come out in really good quality, better than the videos I've been making. A little bit of housekeeping for this thing. You're all coming in muted. There's a way to raise your hand. You might see a little hand icon. If you raise your hand, I can unmute you and try and take your questions. I'm going to apologize in advance. This is the first time I've done this. I did run a practice. So, I mean, I'm not expert in how the software works, but I'm learning it. So, if you have questions, you can type your questions in. I'll try and answer everything at the end. If you have an urgent question, raise your hand and I'll unmute you and we can talk it through. So, I might start with, why are we doing a presentation on auditing the corrective action process? And the reason we are is because I've been on a couple recent witness audits, and some of the things I've seen in the corrective action processes on clients that have been registered for a long time, 20 plus years, problems with root cause, problems with verification of effectiveness, problems with not meeting the 2015 requirements, even though they have been upgraded already to the 2015 standard, maybe think that this is an area that we should really focus. And the reason for that connects directly to our quality policy. We want to say, or we're saying that we want to have process-oriented audits that focus on the effectiveness of the management system. The corrective action process, as you all know as quality professionals, is one of the pillars of the management system because it provides for that self-correction in cases where we have a customer complaint or some other type of non-conformance. So, we have to have very solid systems of corrective action in order to have really effective management systems. The second point is the corrective action system itself will generate value for the customer and for the end customer. If they have a good corrective action system, then they're going to not have repeat problems. So it'll make their systems more efficient and more effective. And from a customer standpoint, they won't be sending out things that are just going to be coming back and creating customer dissatisfaction. So we all know this, so we're not going to dwell on it. The next thing I'm going to talk about is sources of corrective action leading into criteria for it. And we're going to do some polls in this, so we're going to try that out. These are the normal sources of corrective action. You guys are all familiar with stuff like this, like supplier issues, customer complaints, internal and external audits, internal product and process nonconformances, and performance issues. There may be other ones that you've come across. I'm just throwing these out to kind of acclimate ourselves to what are the different sources, and then to introduce the concept of what things require corrective action. So I'm going to launch a poll, and the poll I'm going to launch is this one. What problems require corrective action to eliminate cause? So you should all see that now on your screen, and you should be able to try and answer it. Are you guys seeing this? Hopefully I did that correctly. People are answering. All right, it's working. It's awesome. We have 27% of the people have voted. So, okay, 60% have voted. Give it a couple more seconds. 73% have voted. Anybody else want to vote? We're almost at 100%. We have 87% have voted. Okay, I'm going to take that as a very positive polling result. And I'll share with you your own results. So of the 87% who have voted, 38% said all, 14% said all customer complaints, and 50% said it depends. And the answer was It depends. It depends on the criteria. It was a little bit of a tricky question, a little bit of how it's worded, but let's go through it. Clause 10.21a says the organization has to have a process to react to nonconformity, control, correct, deal with the consequences. That's different than necessarily launching a corrective action where you're going to identify the root cause. So think of yourself in a production environment. You're looking at, or you're auditing a process, and a guy is inspecting it and he finds out something's non-conforming. They're not necessarily going to issue a corrective action that requires root cause analysis for that individual non-conformance. They're going to handle it, they're going to control it, react to it, deal with the consequences, but not necessarily do a root cause investigation. They need to define how they evaluate the need for action to do a root cause investigation type corrective action under 10.21b. So this is a decision they have to make. And so for every supplier reject or every customer complaint or product defect like I just illustrated, or internal audit finding, or process nonconformance, not every one of those is going to result in a corrective action that's going to have a root cause analysis, verification of net effectiveness, all the stuff under 10.21b. Only some of them will have that. What we as assessors are going to look for is what is their criteria and who's responsible for determining whether a corrective action needs to be initiated. That criteria should be defined somewhere, documented if you want to use old terminology, and it has to be effective. So how do you test the effectiveness of a corrective action system's criteria? Well, if you're into the system and you're looking at KPIs that are all bad, and you're looking at tons of customer complaints and lots of supplier rejects and lots of scrap, and then you're looking at this corrective action system and you're not seeing any corrective actions in there, there's an indicator that the effectiveness of whatever that criteria is not very good, because they have a lot of problems with conformance and they're not generating corrective actions. Conversely, you could have, sorry, I had to close the poll. You could have a corrective action or a system that has a very high level criteria, but the system's running really good. So for that particular organization, not putting or having a less stringent criteria for putting something into the corrective action process could work because they just don't need it in terms of their effectiveness. So that's our job as assessors when we're assessing the effectiveness of the quality management system, is to correlate the data that we're seeing out of the processes and on the products through their KPIs and all the other metrics we always talk about to what the systems are doing. And that's a hard job to do, but that's why, we're in there. You're going to see different types of criteria. And you'll see stuff like customer returns greater than a certain dollar amount, or things being a certain amount late, or KPIs trending below some number. This is a very popular one. This one on the bottom is one we used at Northrop Grumman. 3 instances of the same internal product issue identified in a 6-month period would require root cause analysis. So you'll see stuff like that. Doesn't matter what the criteria is, only that it's defined and effective. So the organization is going to set that criteria again, and you're going to evaluate the effectiveness of that criteria. Different organizations take different approaches to corrective action. The two ends of the spectrum, you have a decentralized corrective action system. So that's over here where you have different corrective action systems for different sources. So let's say I'm doing a supplier corrective action, I have it in one system. I'm doing corrective action for internal audits, I have it in another system. For internal problems, in another system. So they're completely independent. Some companies favor a centralized system. So all these different sources will flow into the same database. And you may have hybrids thereof, like suppliers its own and everything else flows into the database. This is what you have to determine as part of your audit planning process. You want to figure out how the company has organized its corrective action processes. Why? Because you need to figure out how many times you're going to be auditing this, and then give the appropriate amount of time to make sure you cover the requirement. So again, a little tip for you for audit planning: when you're asking the question, you need to ask where corrective action is happening. We're going to launch another poll, which will lead into the second one, or the second part of this topic, and that is a company shows you an 8D as their record. Okay, that's their record of corrective action. Does that meet the requirements of ISO 9001 2015 version of the standard? That's the only record they're offering you. So we'll leave it open for a minute, and hopefully you guys are getting this and you can vote on it. Okay, we got about half the people have voted. Close to 2/3 have voted. 80%, 87%. We're almost all the way there. Just give it another 10 seconds here to see if we can get that last vote in. Okay, so our minute poll here with 93% of the returns in, 71% said no, it doesn't comply, and 29% said yes, it does comply. So let's move on and see what the answer was. And the answer is this. And for those that are unfamiliar with 8D, I'm sorry I used some automotive and aerospace terminology there, but I figure most of you being in the profession have run across it. If you're familiar with that form, it's missing some things. It's missing most of the 2015 standard requirements. Now, this is not to say that it couldn't be addressed somewhere else in their system, but if that was all they were offering you as a record of a compliant corrective action system to the 2015 requirements, there would be a problem because you wouldn't see evidence of a few things. Regardless of the approach the client is taking, you need to see a couple things. You need to see that root cause is identified. You need to read the record to make sure the cause and the problem align. I was with Martin Gontars last week. He qualified for ISO 9001. He's already a lead for ISO 14000. He did a very good thing. He took the very first record he got from the corrective action system. He read the problem, he read the root cause, and he started asking the client how that root cause related to the problem statement. It did a few things. It illustrated to the client that we're going to read the records, and it illustrated to the client that the root cause needed to correlate back to the problem statement. Reading the record enabled Martin to find that. That customer did not use a formal problem-solving methodology. They didn't use 5Y. You're familiar with our AR forms, and they didn't use Ishikawa. You can't force somebody to use a formal problem-solving methodology, but if you see them not doing it, it's a great OFI. I don't give very many OFIs. I don't like OFIs because they smell of consulting, and while consulting is a great thing, it's not a great thing for a certification body. But when I see this, if I see a weak root cause system, I will give an OFI that says, hey, this would make your root cause better. If I see that they're not finding root cause, they're going to get an action request. One of the new requirements of the standard is right here. Does the process consider whether similar nonconformances could exist? For those of you that do automotive audits, you're probably familiar of this requirement going all the way back to QS 9000, where it originally came into the automotive standard. When we ask that question, we need to also see that there's evidence of consideration of whether similar nonconformances could exist in other processes or products. We're going to ask whether the actions have been implemented. It's a little different from the next question, which is whether there's evidence of the effectiveness of the action in correcting the problem. It's one thing to see actions are implemented. It's another thing to see that they verified their effectiveness in resolving the cause. So this is something like we do in Section 6 of our ARA. We're interested not only did they do the actions, but did they fix the problem. The last two issues here is a process tied to risk and opportunity and whether there are changes to the QMS. Those are new 2015 standard requirements. It's being missed all over the place. So I'm highlighting your attention to those 2015 requirements that are in clause 10.2.1b. You need to verify that their process addresses it. It doesn't all need to be on a corrective action form. They may address it some other way, but you need to see evidence that they are addressing it in their documented system and see evidence that they are addressing it in each of their corrective actions. We're going to get into a sequence of questioning next. Got a couple charts on that, and then we're going to do our final poll. The first one, if I was auditing a corrective action system, hopefully I would have asked this before I showed up on site, which is, do you use one system? Basically, it's the centralized, decentralized question that I mentioned that you should do at audit planning. If you didn't do it there, then you're going to have to figure it out on the fly and may have to adjust your schedule. The next question has to do with criteria, and we already addressed that. And it's asked a certain way. Is there any set of criteria for when a corrective action is necessary, or do all nonconformances result in corrective action? So a bit leading, but customers generally get the point, and they'll talk to you about what constitutes a corrective action in their system. The next place you want to go in terms of auditing a corrective action system is ask if they have any system to track their cars. Now, you can't require them to do this. There's not a line in the standard that says they have to have a system to track their corrective actions. Most companies are going to have that, and they're also going to have timing requirements. You want to ask if they have it. You want to ask if timing requirements are defined. And then you want to get into that system. Why do you want to get into that system? Because that's where all the records are. You want to be able to choose your own sample. So you can get in that system and you can look for the closed corrective actions. It's always good to start with something that's been closed. That way you can see whatever their process is all the way through to completion. But you can do some other things with that corrective action system. If they define that all corrective actions had to be closed within 30 days, let's just say that was that criteria, and you got into whatever their database or spreadsheet or tracking system was for cars, and you see all the corrective actions are late to the 30-day requirement, that's telling you something about the effectiveness of the system in meeting their own documented internal requirement, which could be a minor AR, or it could be telling you something about resources, or it could be telling you both. So it's a good place to pursue to see, is the system effective in closing out its issues? I always take one that's closed and I use it as an example. I say, all right, let's look at one, walk me through your process. And when I'm walking through the process, what I'm doing is kind of like what Martin did. I'm saying, okay, this was the problem. Show me the root cause. Do you have any formal problem solving methodology? So you're doing something like 5 why for root cause. How do you look across processes and products to determine whether there could be similar issues? How is verification of effectiveness of a corrective action done? How do you document it? Show me how cars are reviewed for updates to risks and opportunities. This could be, again, a tick mark on a form or something on a form, or they could be reviewing these when they're going over risks and opportunities, and you could see the correlation that way for an update. Show me how your cars are evaluated as a driver to potential change for the QMS. So what you just saw there was all the requirements of the system. I'm using my first example. In a centralized system, it only takes one. In a decentralized system, you're going to do it for as many systems that they have. And then at the end, I'm going to say, I'm going to look at some more examples. I'm going to pull 6 to 8 in a centralized system, verify the process is effective. And if we see any issues, I might need to pull a few more. I'm setting an expectation with the customer to say, hey, this is what I'm going to do to you, and this is what's going to happen if there's a problem. And telling them right up front so they're not sitting there going, I wonder how many this guy is really going to look at. And with that, we're going to launch our last poll, which is, how many records should you sample? Okay, we got 100% of the polling done. And the results, 50% said 6 to 8, 31% said 3 to 4 of each type, 19% said 1 to 2. So I'll flip forward to the answer. Before I do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about, well, I'll just talk about the answer. Minimum of 6 in a decentralized system, 3 of each type in a centralized. Those are your minimums. This year, the rest of this year in 2019, the drum that we're going to hear beating is sampling. The feedback from the witness audits has been we're not sampling deep enough. We're looking at one or two. We need to be looking at 6, 8, 3 or 4 of each type. That's what we need to do to verify the effectiveness of the system. One is not going to cut it. So you're going to see a lot more emphasis in all of these presentations through the review process and making sure you sample. I understand that sampling can slow things down, but it's where we're verifying the effectiveness of the system. In terms of taking notes, I favor the table methodology, and I favor it for 2 reasons. Once you set the table up, which takes a minute or 2 to do, you can very quickly take notes. So it's speed, and that speed enables you to focus on what the customer is showing you and read the records instead of having your head down in your notes. So here's my little table, car number, the date I pulled it, the type, internal audit, supplier, internal. And then across the top here are all the ISO 2015 requirements. And so all I'm doing when I'm pulling my sample is putting little tick marks. Now, sometimes I write little notes, but really I'm just putting little tick marks in. And that enables me to keep my head up and have some situational awareness versus having my head down in the notes. So, key points of the audit for corrective action. You need to understand and determine how their process is organized. You need to make sure their process encompasses all of the requirements of 10.2.1. Another good thing Martin did, and I hope I'm not embarrassing you, Martin. I don't have any intention to, but you really did a lot of good things. He had his standard out during the audit. Since I've been back, I've done 6 witness assessments. I think that's the first time anybody has had their standard out during the audit. You need to read the records. So it's more than just pulling a record, writing it down in your notes and moving on. You need to read through it to make sure they're doing the root cause and the verification and all the other requirements of 10.2.1b. You need to make sure there's evidence in the sample. So again, you're going to hear that a lot. So at this point, I've walked you through the charts. I told you it would be a quick presentation. Probably took a little longer than I had imagined it would take. And I'm going to open it up to any questions. So you can either raise your hand or you can type me a question if you see that in your dashboard. Anybody got any questions? Okay, I got one from Cheryl. Let's see if I can make. Thanks, Cheryl. I do want to make one point. I promised Sam that I would make a point of this. He had a question before the presentation about ARA. And his question was this, and this presentation was more about the corrective action system. What his question was is, I'm having trouble getting the client to give me action request responses that have good root cause. I keep going back and forth and rejecting them. What can I do? And so there aren't many options open to you. One, you can keep going back and forth with them, right? You can do that and try and massage them through. You could tell them you're not going to accept their ARs and that could put their certificate in jeopardy. It's a bit heavy-handed. Or you could get some help. And help comes in the form of your BLM. If you need help getting the client to respond or explaining what's necessary to respond in an adequate manner, get your BLM involved. You can get me involved. Send us what you have, and we'll try and intercede on your behalf. But you should only use that if you can't work it out exactly with the client. Let's see, we had some other questions here. Sorry, guys. I'm not expert with this. So a couple people wanted to see the matrix, so I'm going to back up to the matrix. And I'm going to go full screen here. Can you guys see the matrix better? Okay. I had a question in here, and so I'm going to try. Thanks for the feedback that you're seeing it. Does the client have to answer all 5 whys? That comes from Patricia. Quickly, Pat? No. They have to answer as many of the whys as it takes to get to root cause. Now, if they answer 1 why, you, as the evaluator of that, should be highly suspect as to whether they have really done what they're supposed to be doing. Let's see. Presentation recommends suspension of, yes, you could recommend suspension of registration. That's from Bill Whitmore. Good point, Bill. If you're not getting, and that's what I was trying to allude to, if you're not getting response from the client that's adequate to close out the action request, they could go into suspense or go into suspension and go to withdrawal. They only have a certain amount of time to close their ARs. Now, like I said, that can be a bit heavy-handed, but if you're getting that far into it, you've gone 60, 70 days and you can't get these things closed out, you need to make sure that they're taking it seriously. So good point, Bill. Any other questions or comments? Okay, what about poor supplier root cause, particularly key supplier? Okay, good question from Tom. So this is a good path of discussion. A lot of times people want to treat supplier corrective action differently because it's not being done by the organization. But the organization is responsible for those supplier responses. So they need to do an evaluation of the supplier responses and make sure that the supplier has done adequate root cause. If they have not, they should be rejecting that corrective action back to the supplier. If you see through sampling multiple supplier corrective actions, poor root cause across the board, you should question the effectiveness of that supplier corrective action system in meeting the requirements of 10.2.1. Again, maybe the supplier is doing it, but the organization is responsible for that product and for the supplier corrective action. Give it a second here. I don't see any other questions coming in, but let's give it a minute. Any other questions? Okay. Oh, maybe on another one here. So I'm trying to understand your question, Pat. It says if the nonconformance details are in RAM nonconformance, do you need a separate ARA documentation? Not 100% sure I understand the question, but if you're asking, oh, I think I get it. Okay. So if the client responds to you, they should respond to you in the Excel, right? That's what we tell them to do. We give them the Excel when we leave. The client may respond on that Excel format and they may give you evidence to show that they've verified the effectiveness and in fact closed out the issue. You should save the evidence into Audit Center. You don't necessarily have to. If you document it in the Excel version, which you're going to upload back into RAM and upload the Excel into Audit Center, that would be sufficient if you don't want to upload the client's evidence. Sometimes the client's evidence can be voluminous. I did one at General Electric, and the client evidence was many gigabytes of data. So I'm not going to upload that into Audit Center. I summarized it in the ARA, and I uploaded that into Audit Center. So hopefully, Pat, that answered your question. Okay, Mr. Dr. Perry asked a question. He said, many good examples were discussed. Will they be included in the report template red BLUDE letters? Red bold letters. So examples, no, probably not in a report template. I don't want to. Those examples were to illustrate a point. And the problem with giving examples and building examples into templates is what ends up happening is people start interpreting them as requirements. And I don't want you guys to take that. That's not the takeaway from this presentation. The takeaway is we have to audit to the requirements of the standard. Now, I gave you some tips on places you could go that are maybe a little bit beyond the standard. I talked to you about, tracking of corrective actions and timeliness of corrective actions. But if you look in clause 10.2.1, you're not going to find those requirements in there. Organizations should have them, but it is not requirement of the standard. If you look in their documented procedures, you're probably going to find requirements for example, for timeliness and closure and tracking. And you can audit against those requirements. Once they document something in a procedure, that puts it in play. So, we audit them to the requirements of the standard, but also to the requirements of their documented procedures. So it puts it in play and it's fair game. And if you find they're ineffective in closing out their corrective actions to their own time requirements, it's okay. But my point is, you don't want to really build these things into any templates. Having said that, I'm going to put these charts up on the portal. I'm going to put the video up on the portal. If you want to share charts with them, that's fine. Please don't share the video with them. See if we have any other questions. Okay, so Sam asked a question. I'm going to try and read through it with you guys, make sure I try and understand it. If a business shows the 5 why is not used and cause and action looks okay, if 2 or 3 or 4 steps are not used by a paragraph of investigation information is there, if we ask for 5 why steps, standards that show method to be used, it may not be exact. What do you think? I think this. So his question is essentially, I don't see a 5 why, even though there's maybe a 5 why format that's used by the business, but I see in the first why lots and lots of information. And the answer to this is, as I said previously, my first instinct as an auditor is to not like it, right? Because it's a format and we want to see formats being followed. And 5 why is an industry standard and it's there on purpose. My second instinct as an auditor is to read what they wrote and to see if what they wrote is adequate in addressing the root cause. So in Sam's example, they've written a paragraph in why number 1. They didn't just write something like person wasn't trained or procedure not followed, or the kind of shady ones that you see in there. If they wrote a paragraph and you read that, Sam, and you go, this is awesome. Even though they only answered 1 why, they got to root cause. You can feel good about it. Nobody's going to go back to you and go, Sam, we're reviewing your ARA and they only answered 1 why. I mean, we check that stuff as reviewers. Nobody's going to come back and say, you need to go make them do the rest. And if somebody does come back and say that, Sam, you send me an email and I'll get involved. So hopefully I answered the question. Okay, so another question from Patricia. Does DQS have any training to give the client on 5 whys so they can properly complete them? And Patricia, I'm going to say that I have no idea. I'll have to find out for you. I think probably not. I know I got this question, interestingly enough, from somebody else today about what training DQS offers. I know we do training sessions. I believe they're outsourced, but I'll have to find out for you. So I'm sorry, I just don't know. You're right. Take a note. Okay. Any other questions? I'll go as long as you guys want to go. So just, if you got the questions, we're doing this to try and, be interactive. If you, want to talk your question, just raise your hand and I'll unmute you. If you feel more comfortable doing that than typing it in. So a question about different techniques. This is from Patrice. She says, suppose that the supplier using a Shannon technique or Six Sigma, but not a 5 why, is that okay? 100% okay. Yep, as long as it gets them to root cause. Dr. Perry, it just says question. So I don't know if you're asking me a question or not. Oh, here's one from Sam. Can DQS provide guidelines to clients on what corrective action should include? Good idea, Sam. I don't know. I don't know where the line would be on consulting, but I understand your point of it would be nice to hand them the ARs and say, here's how you need to consider responding. Let me check. I have to take an action on that one. Hey, I don't want to take a lot of actions on this. Just joking. Any other questions, comments? Okay, I hope I got them all. If I didn't get them all, you guys know my email address, so just drop me an email and I'll try and answer your questions. I want to thank you all for your participation. There were a lot of good questions here. I wish I was better at using it figures I get to the end and I figure out how to display the questions in a way that I can actually read them. But anyway, I really appreciate the participation. I know it's late for some of you, and again, thank you. So I'm going to end the webinar at this point, and thank you again, and we'll try again in another month. If you have a topic you want to hear about, please feel free to send me an email on it, and I'm always looking for new material to create these videos for. Thanks again. Bye.